I'd like to extend my greetings to the coordinators and the participants of today's conference. It's a huge pleasure to share and listen to ideas on such an important topic from relevant researchers around the globe, here mostly from Latin America. And especially I thank Professor Gladys Lekini for the invitation to the session, and I send my best regards to my dear colleagues at the National University of Rosario, Universidade Nacional de Rosario in Argentina. Well, my presentation is entitled, "Is Africa the Continent of the Future?" as a suggestion from Professor Gladys, and I think that suggestion made me think more philosophically what that expression means. And the proposal here is to explore a bit of my existing research on African security through the ideas of future and agency, using a more essayistic format. And but I could say that is something like a pre-conclusion of my latest research on security and defense dynamics in the African continent. So Africa is the continent of the future. That is a great anthem that marked the beginning of this century. This affirmative sentence has positioned Africa to be the continent of our future, for us, the so-called civilized white Christian Western world. And let's pretend here that we are part of this group. That vision has, since colonialism, placed Africa in a position of subjugation and in the tragic history of the Americas, of which we Latin Americans have been part of. However, stating that Africa is the continent of the future says less about Africa than about those who are saying it. Central to this idea is the Socratic task of knowing ourselves and observing our perception of the component concepts of this idea. I argue that we can start that tough task by decomposing that question into three parts. The first part, whose future is that one? Of course, we are worried about our future, and our future contains Africa in every sense of the word contains. Our interpretation of the Western future and of the other, in this case, Africa, is influenced by our millennialism. That means the way we build our ethical relation with the future and its promise. The Western relationship with Africa has been a mythical combination of fear, curiosity, and excitement that has been called Orientalism. And that is how the Western world places others on its own path to progress. But what fuels Orientalism is our millennial idea that Africa has a future as a supporting character in our own story. There is our duty to build, explore, and deliver. The duty is ours to spread and build Western values of freedom, democracy, peace, justice, development, sacredness, rights, and so on. And to decide by these values who is good and evil, who has the right to fight and to be autonomous. So this is nothing but our future, a future in which our security and consumption are guaranteed and our liberal mind is healed from the guilt of our ancestors' actions. Second, what is this so-called African continent? Do we really know it in its wide diversity and variability? Our representations, and that's my main topic of research nowadays, the representations of Africa are often homogenizing and arrogantly organized in the terms of our own Western experience. Wars and violence in Africa, for instance, have been constantly represented in this pattern. The representation of Africa and Africans, social dynamics in media, movies, TV news, literature, and even video games is so stereotyping and simplistic that we should implement a real revolution in Western education to include scientific knowledge of African history and cultural heritage. And this revolution should be sustained on the development of properly funded African studies, especially in countries that are marked by direct and indirect involvement in the violent migration of African enslaved peoples and or the forced colonization of the African continent. Third, Africa is the future and has a future. But can Africans in Africa really be? What kind of agency do we conceive and concede to Africans? Men and women, poor and rich, powerful and powerless, ethnic majorities and minorities, allies and rivals. Are Africans' partnerships with extra-regional powers an interaction of mere external manipulation or of authoritarian destiny? Do Africans have the power to change the future, or is it structurally determined? Can the USA, Russia, the UK, China, India, France, Brazil, Japan, Argentina produce policies towards Africa without the participation or response of African governments? Can we understand security and insecurity in Africa outside of a top-down perspective, but also informed by global power dynamics? Are we able to understand transnational terrorism, military coups, insurgency, and counterinsurgency, as well as African responses to African problems? Well, many aspects of the African security environment can be understood by the conflict of identities, the struggle for power and inequalities in the access to the continent's own riches. But deep historical structures established by the colonial past of slavery and plunder have built a structure of at least three structural pillars. First, internal fragmentation. Second, lack of legitimacy of modern or colonial, if you wish, institutions. And third, extraordinary profit of the status quo for new colonial elites, even the African ones. In this view, any modification in security dynamics that maintains these structures is mere surface change. Militaries that come into power to profit from state fragmentation, foreign partnerships that reinforce new colonial practices, peace operations or security sector reform programs that try to substitute the state or implement a neoliberal state all produce a future of continuation in which Africa is an object of others' protagonism. But this is just a Brazilian perspective, not an African one. Nonetheless, just like our past and present, I'm certain that there is no future for Brazil, for Argentina, and for South Americans if our mother Africa does not find its own path. So that was my idea on security problems in Africa. I've been studying that for 10, 15 years now, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you, Professor Gladys, and all the colleagues, and Professor Hassan for the comments. They are brilliant, and insightful, and provocative. Actually, the idea of researching narratives and also representations, mainly in our social networks and digital world, came across me when I was studying focused on facts and material problems in African security environment. So creating typologies, creating models to understand, and then those research outputs always got in confrontation with the representations and narrative that were so popular in our media and including our students. So if you go to teach a class on African international relations, the students come to the university with an idea of Africa that is completely based on the narratives from the media, and usually Western-centered media. And so I came across the video games. So trying to understand Africa through video games is amazing problem that students are, relating with day-to-day basis. So those problems are really important. I thank you very much for those ideas, and trying to deconstruct narratives may be processed together with factual research and research in depth on the security environment of Africa. I'm a bit pessimistic on the idea that these partnerships and new partnerships options to Africa can bring more, or will bring more autonomy to African countries. I'm not so sure about that. And I'm not so sure that changes in governments can really mean state strengthening and societal institution strengthening. So I agree with you, Professor Hassan, that we need to focus on South-South cooperation, and that South-South cooperation from foreign policies of our countries may import our research outputs and our research comprehension on Africa, and that's not always the reality that we see. Usually, our departments on Africa from our foreign ministries are so small, and they do not contact with researchers. At least in Argentina, we could see a great moment for that, but those great moments are so short, and we need to pressure for a proper South-South cooperation relationship among those countries. Thank you very much.